Hugh, you've got two projects that are going to be eligible at the Golden Globes and SAG Awards this year. One on the TV side, one on the movie side. Let's talk about Paddington 2 first. When you took that role, a very comic villain kind of a role, you then got it at BAFTA this past year. Tell us about getting that news that it was a BAFTA nominated role.
Yeah, that was a huge surprise and a treat, and not just for me, but for everyone involved with Paddington, really, because it's not Paddington 2 is not a classic awards type film. It's a kids film. It's a sequel. It's semi-animated. It's not the sort of normal Oscar bait or BAFTA bait type film. So it was really nice of BAFTA to come up with a nomination like that.
Well, the reason it's eligible here is it came out in England in December of last year,
Right.
falling into that cycle, and
Yeah.
then it came out in January in America.
Yeah.
So that's why you're eligible now on the cycles over here.
Yeah.
Tell us about just why you would want to accept that role, and you get to play an actor who was very famous and then now does commercials.
Yes.
Were there any particular actors in mind that you were impersonating a little bit?
Well, when I got the script, it came with a covering letter from the producers saying, and directors saying, we're doing a sequel to Paddington, and there's a part in it for a washed-up narcissistic actor, and we thought of you. So it was hurtful, but I read it, and it was very funny and very clever and rather moving. That's the strange thing about Paddington. It's moving. I'd go so far, I may sound ridiculous, as to say it's kind of important, because the whole philosophy of Paddington, of the original books, is that he's an outsider, he's an alien from Peru who comes to London, and some people like Mr. Brown want to keep him at arm's length, but in fact he's welcomed, and so there's something in Paddington to be said about welcoming strangers, refugees, aliens, which is sort of pertinent in these political times. And also Paddington's, he's been taught by Aunt Lucy to always see the positive in everyone, see the good in everyone. And that sounds like it could be sugary and repulsive, but is strangely unrepulsive. It's rather lovely in the film. Anyway, I'm the baddie, and I see the bad in everyone, of course, but I'm nevertheless touched, just when I watch the film, I'm touched by the sort of the positive ethos of it.
Just the full-scale production of that, with your costumes, the production design, just so much involved in that particular movie. What did you think when you saw it all put together?
Well, what I'd not realised when I signed on is quite how successful the first film had been. So there was a load of money on this second film. And
this is one of the most beloved franchises now in England, right?
Absolutely, and in fact, I think internationally.
Yeah.
There was a lot of money floating around for the second one, and which you need when you're doing. The bear himself, created in a computer, I believe, cost something like $20 million just to do that. But it is brilliant. It's so realistic, and my father, my 90-year-old father at the premiere, did turn to me halfway through the film and say, "Is that a real bear?" It was a big production, and what's extraordinary about Paul King, who directed it, is he's a proper cinephile. He's seen everything. It's a bit like, if you see interviews with Quentin Tarantino or Martin Scorsese, they're always quoting other films, film references everywhere, and there's lots of references and homages in their work. And Paul King's like this, even though he's making a sequel to a kid's film. It's very cinematic. Every shot is very carefully designed, very creative, very inventive. So I say, to this day, I think Paddington 2 is a bit of a masterpiece. I mean, it is, as you probably know, the best reviewed film.
Yeah.
In terms of Rotten Tomatoes.
Was there a Hugh Grant movie that he referenced at any given point? Remember this when you did this in this movie, or we're trying to go for?
No, not really. I mean, in the end, the character is unlike me because he's from the theatre, and he's a big theatrical lovey, as we call them in England, and so he really I created him out of scraps of old actors that I'd worked with in my 20s in the provincial theatre in England. It wasn't really me.
And speaking of the end, you get the big musical number.
Yes.
Is that going to lead to, musicals are making a little bit of a comeback in the film world. Has anybody approached you about starring in some big movie musical?
Well, shockingly, they haven't. But
that's a fun scene, though. Was that fun or difficult in terms of your part of it?
Well, it was horrendously difficult because it was actually my first scene in the film, the first one I shot, even though it comes right at the end of the film. And for a 56-year-old guy to suddenly have to be prancing around in pink spandex up and down stairs with umbrellas twirling, doing tap dancing, it was a challenge, particularly amongst professional dancers. But there's a strange part of me that likes it. I danced a bit in Florence Foster Jenkins. I've danced in other films, and the older I get, the more I'm slightly drawn to it.
Yeah.
And it's also touching how, we go to all these lengths and tear our hair out to move people with drama or make them laugh with comedy. And yet sing and dance, well, beautifully choreographed, and you're giving people pleasure that's as deep, if not deeper, than either drama or comedy. So I think it's ripe for a comeback.
Yeah, that scene, it's been out a while, so I'm going to say spoiler alert, but it's set in the prison.
Yeah.
And you, to tie this all together, you have a couple of jail scenes, and the other project we want to talk about, which is a very British scandal. I didn't know much about this story, and I'm not sure if Americans did. The story of Jeremy Thorpe, who you played, starting in the 60s. What level of knowledge is this scandal in England? Is it very, very familiar?
Well, to anyone over the age of kind of 50, you definitely remember it because it was huge in the late 70s. When I was in my late teens, at the time I was at school, and it was just everything in the news, and it was pure pleasure. It was a Monty Python type farce of this establishment figure in his beautiful suits, and he'd gone to the right schools, he knew everyone from the Queen to the Archbishop of Canterbury, and yet he turned out to be secret gay lovers, to have organised an incredibly amateurish hit on his ex-lover, and then we got the gory details of everything they got up to, and from the courtroom, from the ex-lover, and so it was all voyeuristic joy for the British nation, really, and a source of great merriment and many jokes.
As I watched it, if somebody asked me to quantify it in terms of what is it, I don't know. It's a drama. It's got some comedy in it.
Yeah.
It's farcical at times.
Yeah.
It's a murder mystery. The music really makes you feel like it's a murder mystery from the 60s. How would you categorize it?
It's. I agree that part of the pleasure of it, and part of the reason I wanted to do it, is because it does walk this very fine line between drama and comedy, really, and I would describe it as a black comedy. And the writer Russell Davies, who did the screen adaptation, he's famous for that. He's the guy that the new Doctor Who and everything. He's our best kind of TV writer, and he can just see the kind of fun side of any scene, even if it's about murder, and sort of rejoices in the grotesque shapes that human beings twist themselves into with their prejudices and their, you're right. It's hard to describe, and I'm doing rather a bad job.
Well, for people that don't know, it's basically a 3-hour limited series.
Yes.
For Amazon, and you had very rarely done television, other than especially a little bit early in your career.
Yeah.
Was Stephen Frears one of the biggest attractions for doing it?
Yeah, I had done Florence Foster Jenkins with Stephen Frears, and then we were having dinner one night, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to do this thing," and he said, "Oh no, don't do that. I've got something else for you," and then sent me these scripts. I thought, scripts instead of script? Is this television? I don't do television. I was very snobby, and then they were perfect. They just were perfect. They were funny. They were sad. It was a brilliant character. It was a part of history that I could remember relishing and wanted to relish again. Fantastic screenwriter, Ben Whishaw, Stephen Frears. It was a very easy thing to say yes to.
Ben, oddly enough, I watched Paddington 2 this past week, and then watched Very British Scandal, and all I could hear when
English
Ben was on
Scandal.
screen was Paddington, even though he was on, and playing a totally different character. You've worked with him now. I don't guess you worked with him necessarily on when he did the voiceover on Paddington, but obviously you worked with him on British Scandal. Just talk about him a little bit and working with him.
Well, yeah, it's weird. I mean, I have effectively spent the last 2 or 3 years trying to rape or kill Ben Whishaw. one form or another. And prior to that, he played my wife in Cloud Atlas, in one of those little vignettes. What could I tell you? He is a brilliant actor. I think he's the best British actor of his generation, really, and he can sort of do anything. So he lifts your game.
What was the reaction in England when this aired, the 3-hour limited series?
It was fantastic. Having not had anything on television since the early 90s, it was a new experience for me, and especially because of social media. So it came out on a Sunday night. It was BBC in England. It was made by the BBC, and it came out at 9 o'clock. And you go on Twitter and put in a very English scandal, and in live time comes up the nation's reaction to this thing, and it was really phenomenal, I have to say. It was a lovely thing. It was one of the nicest things in my life. It just went absolutely stratospheric, and the reviews were lovely, and it's just nice to know one can go to one's grave really proud of something.
Did the general reaction? Did the public feel like you got it right in terms of the story?
Yes, I think they did, but more than that, they were entertained. I'm big on that. I sometimes think there's a danger of, especially acting becoming a sort of therapy or masturbatory in some way. I think it has to be part of entertaining people. That's where it began, and that's where I think it belongs. Yeah.
Back to Paddington for a second. I meant to ask you this on that section. We were talking about this earlier. That your role feels like something, because you played your character in disguise several times. It felt like to me and to Zach that 40, 50 years ago, this could have been something. I hope this is a huge compliment, because it means, that Alec Guinness or Peter Sellers might have played. You felt like, to me, somebody as an actor that was following their footsteps.
Well, there could be no higher praise. It's very nice of you. Yeah. It's
Both
funny
of them
that
had done movies that where they played multiple characters, I guess.
Yes, the multiple character thing, but also just character acting. It's funny. It's taken me all these years to get back to it, because it's really where I started. I used to have a comedy show in London at the theatre where we just did characters and silly characters, imitations, things like that. And then, for one reason or another, I got drawn into sort of being leading man, which is all very well, and I'm grateful, and I made some successful films like that. But I feel like I have more to offer when it's creating more of a character, something further away from myself.
When I talked to you 2 years ago, I already asked you about your Golden Globe year where you won for 4 weddings, which I think is still one of the greatest speeches ever at the Golden Globes. Funny and touching and everything else. Because we're an awards website, I won't follow that particular line, but what was your first big award show? What was the first award show that you went to?
That one.
That was the first big one?
Yes.
What was it like? That's a TV and movie night. Yeah. And it's a big party too. It's not like a typical award show where you're in a seat, stuffy seagull
Well-
night. Tell us about were there any particular memories of people you met that night that you heroes or people that you ran across their path?
Well, everything was new to me in those days. The whole of Hollywood, America, was new to me. It was just after Four Weddings had come out, and so suddenly I'm in LA at the Golden Globes. I think the Golden Globes was a slightly different beast in 1994, 5, whenever that was, because it was still on TNT and it just wasn't so gigantic. It hadn't become, almost as big as the Oscars like it has now in terms of TV coverage. But I remember being surprised by how seriously everyone took it. People say, the Golden Globes is really fun. Maybe, but I tell you, the studios take it really, really seriously, as you doubtless know. I remember sitting down after I'd won, and the guy from Polygram saying, that's a lock on the Oscars. I didn't even know what a lock was. It's an American parlance. He was wrong, as it happens. But there was fierce competition in that room. I remember that. And also the embarrassment one feels, because the other nominees were brilliant. I mean, they were, people like John Travolta from Pulp Fiction. And there's no part of me that thought I'd given a better performance than John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. But, it was very nice, nevertheless, of the Hollywood Foreign Press to give that award.
Well, you got 2 more chances. We think you might be there for both this time. It's rare for somebody to have 2 on the same night, but you might well do it this time.
You're very nice.